The music combined headlines and horror film, fact and fantasy, bizarre.
And you may be surprised to know that Tampa Bay is the death metal capital of the world.
It's called death metal. It's louder and faster than heavy metal, and it has a message.
About being brutal. We want to see bodies fly, bodies slamming.
What about people that say that it's satanic, it's devil-worshipping music?
They just don't understand the music, that's all.
We hear Chuck playing the early death material, and it is low and earth-shaking and guttural.
And I think the real thing that Chuck was able to do that was unlike a lot of other people in that extreme scene back then was he found a sound that was uniquely his.
It was something different. Oh man, that's freaking badass, that's freaking cool.
He made such great sacrifices, and I could tell he was doing it not for fame and fortune, but for truly the music, and he loved his fans.
We're playing an arena in Mexico. It was like death were like the Beatles there.
Chuck Schuldiner, I've always sort of thought he was one of the founding fathers, as it were, of death metal. He had every bit of drive that you would ever want from an artist.
For me, music is the dream, and to keep reaching for bigger things, that's what my goal was.
As his albums progressed, he didn't pull inspiration from the outside world, he pulled it from within and brought it out.
One of the main things that really puts a dark cloud on it is he's going through some physical changes. He's trying to figure out what the hell's wrong with him.
And he was like, you know, my hand's not doing what I thought it should do.
I said, we need to get an MRI.
I get in the back seat, we're driving down the road, and I'm like, what's going on? And Chuck just lost it.
The doctor gave him 3 to 6 months to live.
It was his worst nightmare coming true.
We were in the middle of working on the Control Denied album, and he was hell-bent on getting that album done.
For Chuck, it had to be a race against time. His health versus his music. The music took precedence.
Oh yeah, this wall, we were spray painting it all the time with our favorite bands. And this was a wall in the Coconut Grove neighborhood in Miami. And I had just finished spray painting the Death logo on the wall because we were such huge fans. So it's a pretty cool moment. My name is Paul Masvidal. I'm a guitar player and vocalist in a band called Cynic, and I met Chuck through the underground tape trading scene in probably 1986. And then one day I get the call and Chuck's like, dude, can you help me? I've got a gig in Mexico in like 2 weeks. And I was like, yeah. The early origins of the death metal scene was almost punk in the sense that it was driven by just visceral brutality, you know, just absolute rage.
We were in our high school days looking at this underground scene, and that was what we vibed with. It's got to be pretty evil and pretty dark to be death metal. My name's Steve DiGiorgio, bass player. I met Chuck in the early days. We were about 17. Death metal is the most caveman style approach, yet the dichotomy is you have to be very technically proficient to play it because it's high speed and it's very precise riffing. But I think the vocals are the main defining characteristic. Death metal is the guttural voice.
The vocals, the approach was like, you sound like a demon. I mean, like an absolute monster, you know? And when you put Chuck's voice on it, it suddenly is like, wow, listen to that guy's voice.
To me, when I first heard it, I said, this guy just swallowed broken glass. It was sort of different than a lot of the other concurrent death metal bands. My name's Jim Morris. I met Chuck Schuldiner in the late 80s and did several albums with him in the 90s and in the 2000s, and I considered him a personal friend. The first time I ever heard about Death was when we got a call to record an album. But my first reaction was, my parents aren't going to like this at all. And that's sort of the point. It was break all the rules, let's get as extreme as we can get. And Chuck was sort of right in the front of that.
As a death metal singer, I try to make things interesting and as catchy as possible.
I mean, I just never really heard music like that before, you know? So,
well, yeah, like what was your reaction to it?
it's like, it sucks. And Chuck and I were very open about that. You know, I didn't understand it all. That was his thing. My dad was proud, and my mom was very proud. Chuck, of course, thought it was the greatest thing ever. I'm Beth Schuldiner, and I'm Chuck's older sister. Chuck was definitely the spoiled young one.
Family was very important to him, very important. I'm Mal Schuldiner, Chuck's father, Chuck's proud father.
What was Chuck like as a kid?
He was very likable, easygoing kid. I thought very quiet, very soft-spoken. Had a lot of good characteristics, a lot of good traits.
We would wake up on Saturday mornings, and my dad had a reel-to-reel, and he would play 50s music, and we'd dance around the house. The whole family loved music, so the house was filled with music.
He was an enormous fan of Kiss, Chuck, you want to, rock, something powerful. They were dynamic, they were different.
Chuck so wanted to see them, and my parents got us tickets in North Carolina.
And we went. Chuck was thrilled with it. I mean, it was great stuff.
Halloween, dress up for Kiss, Kiss birthday cakes, and so he'd paint posters with his friend David Menchu.
Chuck and I met in the 5th grade, and he noticed that I was drawing Kiss pictures on the back of my folders. I'm David Menchu, and Chuck was my best friend. We discovered so much together as kids, and we discovered heavy metal together, and just obsessed. Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, Metallica's Kill 'Em All, darker stuff like Bathory. Chuck was a huge Venom fan. Chuck started playing guitar. He learned by obsessing, sitting in the bedroom for hours every day, and he just got heavier and heavier and darker. And then he met Rick.
My name is Frederick Donald DeLillo. I go by Rick Ross in the death metal world, and met Chuck Schuldiner in 1983 at a backyard party. Swapped numbers and then just started hanging out. He had a garage. I was like, woo! We just all got together and just played in that garage. Yeah, it was cool stuff, man. Chuck was like the master of tape trading. The both of us would sit in his room. We would dual cassette it all day long, just freaking making tapes. He was really good at it. Yeah, he was a pretty dedicated guy, man. He was, succeed in what he wanted to do.
And we recorded Mutilation demo, which we sent to Combat.
And then Chuck got a record contract.
Towards the end of high school, he got an envelope from Combat Records, which was one of our favorite labels, and they were offering him a recording contract. It was crazy.
If you look at the first few records, Scream Bloody Gore, Leprosy, those were just like brutal, intense, heavy music.
I started this band when I was 16 years old, so the music is growing rapidly from each record to each record now, as well as I am.
And they were having a ton of fun. I remember walking in one day and seeing a grapefruit on a string. And I remember saying, Chuck, why is there a grapefruit? And Chuck was like, that's not a grapefruit, that's the orb of metal. And when you're doing the vocals, you have to have the orb of metal, at which point the entire control room starts giggling because it's funny. He's self-deprecating. He's making fun of everything about his own music.
And to show how metal we are, Chuck is on the orb.
Yeah, so playing in a band called Death, in a scene that's called death metal, we were really not. Because Chuck hated being pigeonholed into one sound. And you can tell, every fan knows that the sound and the writing style changes per album. So everything about Death was about creating something strong and then moving on and trying something different.
Chuck had a way of zoning in on a concept and just creating something that the kids could feel down deep in their gut. My name is Kim Robinson, and Chuck Schuldiner was my soulmate. When I lived in Miami, I was in journalism. I knew that there was these fanzines out there, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so it was called Cerebral Holocaust. And that was the first I started writing about the music. The first time I met Chuck, I was about 19, and Chuck was going to be coming down to the Cynic warehouse.
Kim was like a fixture kind of in our inner circle. And we had a warehouse down in Miami where we would all hang out. And this is how, I introduced Chuck to Kim.
I walked into the warehouse, and directly across the room, Chuck looked up and I looked at him, and our eyes locked. It was an immediate connection. Some people believe in that love at first sight. That's literally what it was. He was just so nice, down to earth. By the end of the night, I kind of forgot that he was Chuck from Death, and he was just Chuck. He lived in Altamont Springs, and he invited me to come up there. And so I met his mom, and his nephew, Christopher, was really little. And so we ended up engaged by 1992. Chuck was very dedicated to his family, especially with his brother, Frank, passing years before I met Chuck. I believe that Chuck was very in tune with death in itself, stemmed from his experience as a child. And then Chuck used that pain in a very constructive way.
This was for you. This was called Open Casket!
And so when it came time, we were talking in his bedroom. And I never had seen Chuck cry, but he was choked up and teary, telling me about the death of his brother.
So Chuck's the youngest.
Yes, I'm middle, and Frank is the eldest.
And he's 4 years older than you?
Correct. He was our big brother, so we looked for him to take care of us. But I think that Chuck with Frankie, it was a very loving relationship. He looked up to Frankie, and Frankie took care of him. He was an Eagle Scout. He played tri-level chess. He was an intellect, but he was really casual and fun and sweet. He didn't grow past 16. Frankie was visiting my aunt and uncle and their kids in Greenville, South Carolina. We received a phone call from my uncle. I was next to my mother. We were in the kitchen, and she answered the phone in the kitchen. She just knew that there was a horrible accident, and that's when she dropped the phone. And maybe in a half an hour, we were in the car headed to South Carolina. I remember the drive there was probably 10 hours, but it seemed like 20. And we went to the hospital, and when we walked in, I remember a nurse saying to my mother, "Your son died." And she said, "He's in the cooling room, so we'll take you there. Kids stay here." And it was just me and Chuck.
When the situation with Frank happened, Chuck told me that Frank had gone to the cousin's house, and apparently they were playing with guns they found, and the bullet hit Frank in the head.
Then another nurse came up and handed to me a brown bag. She said, "Give this to your parents." And I said, "Okay." And then Chuck and I looked in the bag, and it was my brother's clothing, saturated in blood. I just remember both of us crying and frantically looking for somewhere to hide this bag. We knew as small children that you don't give that to grieving parents, and what would be the purpose. So we ran and found a trash can and threw it away and never made mention of it to my parents. And then the next day, relatives coming in from everywhere and a funeral. We had never been to a funeral before, so you don't know what to expect, your children. And I remember walking in with Chuck. There's an open casket with our brother in it. And I do remember Chuck saying, "Can I touch him?" And I said, "It's not a good idea," because I regret having done that. Because you're a child, you don't know, you think you're going to touch a warm face. And I'm so glad he didn't, because I think that would have even just been so much worse. And I remember at the time, Chuck asking me, is it okay for boys to cry? You know, I was young myself, you know, of course. And my father, he was hurting. You know, my mom was almost like a zombie, really. And she was also afraid to let us out of her sight. Life changed. Life certainly changed for Chuck.
And I think it was one of the single most things that he was angry about. Angry that his brother left. Angry, originally angry at God. I believe that the band Death was his outlet. I think that's where he was reaching down deep and grabbing some of that inspiration from, was the pain and the agony from his brother's death.
Yeah, he tried to really write more socially aware lyrics, personal experiences, and he was into this semi-cerebral state of writing stuff that's interesting, and he's enjoying it. He loved being different. When you're in death metal, thrash metal, whatever, black leather jacket, black t-shirt, usually logo of your favorite band stuff, and you see him walking around with a Blondie shirt, white t-shirts with kitty cats on them. I'm walking around with Birkenstocks and a headband, and Gene's got a cane with an 8-ball on it, and everybody had their own character that was totally outside of this death metal look, and he encouraged the hell out of that.
We appreciate everybody's support, we really do. We've been getting really good reviews. I've only really seen a couple of the shitty ones, but those are from people who just don't know what the fuck they're talking about.
And that's when things started really opening up for him, getting better publicity and coming into his own. And at this time, Death was a force.
As he was getting more notoriety and the albums were starting to sell, we realized that when you're like a sole proprietor of a business and you're dealing with the business side, the musical side, and then the touring side, all the logistical things about touring, there was a weight on him. Sometimes he would be upset at things that were going on tour.
Describe what it was like being on tour with Chuck.
Every time was different.
Try to do a few tours, go to Europe a few times, come back home, never finish a tour.
He's developing a reputation for leaving tours, canceling shows. We had a tour manager on this particular tour that was an old buddy of mine, and I told him straight up, grab him by the shirt. Physically, do not let him just, I'll be right back. No.
On tour, he's had people take his money, take his things, steal from him.
He was on the phone with the owner of Combat Records just screaming at this guy, and I was like, whoa.
There was a lot of press where people were coming up to him and asking him questions, and he would get really triggered by that.
Somebody told me that the record company wouldn't pay for your flight, you had to pay out your own money, so that's why you cancelled it.
Well, yeah, there were a couple tours that we had to cancel. When you don't get money, you cannot tour.
Yeah.
And people have to realize because you have albums out does not mean you have the money to do it yourself.
He was pushed to his edges, and sometimes it would turn that corner, where it was just like, whoa, okay. There's a lot of nostalgia in death metal and people love to gossip. So he would always, you'd see him in old interviews saying, no more rumors, don't believe the rumors, because he felt very betrayed.
Oh, Merry Christmas.
At the same time, he couldn't wait for the tour to end so he could get back home. He became homesick a lot.
These are mail made in 1962.
He just wanted to be home with his mom. The death of Frankie made such a powerful impact in his life that he took care of everything.
I think he definitely gave family priority. He did not like touring. I mean, he loved his fans. He loved being in the moment, but that whole process killed him. My name is Chris Steele. Chuck Schuldiner is my uncle, my mother's brother.
And here's a few minutes with Chris Steele.
Christopher loved Chuck so much.
That's my uncle. He's afraid of spiders.
You know it.
God, it was so crazy. They almost seemed like they were the same age when they were together sometimes. I think that Christopher allowed him to go back and be the child he was before Frankie died.
Frankie's passing, there was still always a shadow of that over the family. You'd see my grandparents pass by his picture and stop for a second, look at it.
There's Frankie.
And I think when a major loss like that occurs, there's collateral damage, and I think the holidays are one of those things. And Chuck was super into holidays. Yeah, he definitely kept the family traditions going.
He was all about his family. When he wasn't doing music, he was doing family and home. I think he was able to throw the switch back and forth and really concentrate on one thing or the other thing. I first really started directly working with Chuck on the Symbolic album and then The Sound of Perseverance. He said to me he wanted to lean on me for some more advanced musical approaches. I think he felt somewhat limited by what death metal had become.
He's heard everywhere. I mean, it's to the point where you hear all the post bands that kind of borrowed from them, right? It's like, oh, those are death riffs,
And when the bands that were following in line of the death sound, we're talking about Satanism and the demons, and he's getting lumped in with bands that are doing it blatantly.
Reality is far more brutal than a demon tearing someone's heart out. That just does not happen in life. I see no demons around me. I think if there's evil, it's people.
Yeah, he was asking record companies to not do combined record ads, separate his album release advertisements from the other bands. Anything to create a distance from what they were doing because he believed he was doing something totally different.
Those bands hated Chuck. They would write to him terrible things. They would pass rumors through the rumor mill and that they thought he was a sellout. That wasn't his intent, but he just wanted to evolve.
Chuck was very intense about recording, about what he was trying to do. And on the day we're starting vocals, Chuck says to me, Jim, I don't want to start the vocals yet. I want to listen to everything. My reaction is, we don't have the budget for that. Chuck's, I got to do it. It's important. I'm like, it's important to you, it's important to me. So we sit up and we listen to every song. And Chuck looks at me and goes, well, let's go ruin it. I'm like, and it's going to be even better with the vocals on it. But that stuck with me the whole time. Let's go ruin it. And that's the predecessor to what Control Denied was all about. That's where he was going, and I didn't know it at the time.
What's interesting with Chuck, he always had at his disposal, an endless flow of ideas, and he was just ready to reinvent himself.
In fact, he got so sick of his own vocal style that he quit singing for his own band and got someone that he was a fan of.
Control Denied is very much a band. It's going to be equally as important, even more so than what Death has done, because it will have the ability to go farther in what I feel needs to be done musically that can't be done with Death.
For him, that was, let's do just as extreme music, but with melody At that point, Chuck's the songwriter and the main guitar player. Richard Christie, Shannon Hamm, Steve DiGiorgio, and then doing vocals, you add Tim Amar into it.
There wasn't really much to compare it to because it was basically a death metal band with a power metal singer, but not singing in the power metal style per se.
Chuck seemed nervous. He said to me, you know, this is kind of scary because it's like a whole new style of music. I want to make sure that I bring my fans with me. That's why I'm doing this. I want to give them the next thing. When we started the Control Denied record, and Chuck would just kind of play an amalgamation of what all the guitar parts were going to be. One thing about Chuck as a guitar player, great vibrato, great bending skills, had a very muscular approach with his left hand. And then he started having problems, and he was like, you know, my hand's not doing what I thought it should do. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It sounds great. He says, no, I'm struggling. And he says, and my neck hurts. He would hand me the guitar and he'd say, imitate my vibrato and put it in there.
He was losing his dexterity during this. So he's going through some physical changes. He's trying to figure out what the hell's wrong with him.
We were at the Altamont Mall, and Chuck tripped. And me being the asshole sister, I said, walk much? And he's like, it's not funny. And I said, well, what's going on? And he goes, sometimes my foot just flops. And I also noticed that Chuck started doing this a lot. And within 3 months, he was getting worse. So I called the orthopedic clinic, make an immediate appointment. We get in a couple days later. I said, we need to get an MRI. And then we received a phone call from the neurologist. And he said, I need to make an appointment. Can you come tomorrow? And it was Chuck's birthday. We went in, and the doctor said, there is no easy way to say this to you, and said, you have a brain tumor. It's a glioblastoma of the pons region, and you have 3 to 6 months. I remember Chuck not saying anything, just looking straight ahead. And we were just kind of, at this point, it almost sounds like you're in a hole. The doctor walked back a couple of steps, and Chuck tried to stand up, and Chuck collapsed. And so the doctor grabbed him before he hit the floor, and I called my father.
And got a phone call. Then said, Chuck got his diagnosis and prognosis, and it's terrible. Okay, I'll come right away.
Then we knew we had to tell Mom, and that was our biggest fear. Because of how she reacted to the death of my other brother, now we're going in and telling her this. But Chuck didn't want to do that first, and I was in my own car, so Dad took Chuck to go pick Chris up from school early.
I get called up to the administration office like, hey, your grandfather and uncle are here to pick you up, which was super bizarre. My grandfather would never take me out of school early. I get in the back seat, we're driving down the road. Chuck was clearly upset. You know, he's very quiet, looking down. And I'm like, what's going on? And my grandfather just kind of casually said they found something right here. And Chuck just lost it. Incomprehensible noises, you know, like just guttural crying, like almost like a child would cry.
He called me at work, and they said it was Chuck, and I thought that was really odd because at the time we had been broken up for 5, almost 6 years because I really wanted to get married. I wanted him to be my husband. I think that was sort of a hard concept for him, and so I left. We started talking on the phone. He was crying, and he told me that he had cancer. Facing that prognosis was devastating to Chuck. Even though he wanted to be hopeful, he knew that the odds were against him.
He certainly wasn't in denial about it, but I think he was sort of like, he wanted to insulate his friends from the kind of horror that it was. finishing the album became unimportant to me at first. I will tell you this, it was important to Chuck. He stayed on point and on task, and we had already cut the 4 rhythm tracks for the next Control Denied record. I kind of think that was cathartic for him as a way to deal with all this other shit that's happening. For Chuck, it had to be a race against time.
So then we went on the journey looking for doctors immediately.
My mom went into like battle mode. Like, let's make a plan. Like, how are we gonna attack this? She's like, I don't accept that prognosis. Within that week, she started making phone calls and doing research.
Well, it turns out I found Dr. Weiner after many other doctors. And Dr. Weiner worked at NYU. And so I said, okay, the best hospitals are there. Florida's great for old people and hearts, not brain tumors. And we got on a plane immediately to New York. We went to see Dr. Weiner, and he looked at the scans, examined Chuck. He said, I'm not gonna lie to you. He goes, this is a bad situation here. I said, you can't operate, you can't do, I just didn't understand. Okay, it's in his head, go get it. And he said, it's the location. Your pons of your brain is like a ball of rubber bands, all nerves. And there's a tumor on it. And we can go in and take the tumor out, but we don't know what damage we will do to your body while we're doing this. We could blind you, we could paralyze you. And he said, but if this were in either one of my children's head, I'd want to know what the hell it was and see if I could go get it. And Chuck was like, that's what we're gonna do. But now we're talking about an enormous amount of money. Chuck had resources, and you burn through those pretty fast. And I had 2 cars, I sold a car. Then I sold my house. And the fans immediately started writing letters. I mean, there were hundreds of letters, and the sweetest things ever. Like, there would be a euro taped on the inside. I don't have a lot of money, but here, this is to help. It was amazing.
We were in the middle of working on the Control Denied album, and I think the album cheered him up and kept him focused during all his medical treatments he was doing. And he would say stuff like, man, I think I got this. Let's make plans for the future.
So when the brain surgery was finally scheduled, it was hours long, hours long.
Any kind of brain surgery is going to be very worrisome. I mean, we were so scared sitting there waiting for the doctors to come out. I mean, anything could have happened on the table. He could have passed away there. He could have been injured to the point where maybe he'd be a vegetable at that point. Who knew? So, I mean, it was brutal. I said to Bethan, I wish I could trade places with him. I would have given him a brain transplant if I could have. Can't do it.
His surgery was very successful. He was waking up, and Dr. Weiner said, move your arm, move your hand, lift up your leg. Chuck, he had a very hard time doing before the surgery, so immediately the surgery offered him relief. They did not get all of the brain tumor, nor could they get all of the brain tumor. When the doctor said if he went any further, he could paralyze Chuck or blind Chuck. When they released Chuck, for the first time in a long, long time, he was able to go out there and be Chuck, and it meant the world to him. We knew the battle wasn't over, but Chuck said, I just want some normal, I want to be normal.
When he first got out of brain surgery in New York, we just talked for hours, and I would be his sounding board, as much as a 15-year-old could be, right? So he would just dump on me what he was feeling, his fears, his dreams, his goals. He would always say, when I recover, when this, when that. There was no if. He had plans of venturing more into the production side. And then he would talk about his fears, leaving us behind scared him, the fallout from that. I remember being in the shower, and I heard Chuck playing guitar for the first time, and I started hearing songs, and that was so emotional, man. I got goosebumps. I got that pit in my stomach. It was a very visceral feeling to hear that music again. It was like almost hearing him break free of chains. It was amazing.
There was an upswing to his health. His attitude was improving, his mood was improving, his dexterity was coming back a little. We had conversations, just hypothetical things about going out as Death, calling it the Death Farewell Tour, and immediately following that tour up with a Control Denied full tour, So he was hell-bent on getting that second album done, and he was kicking out the songs for the second album. He wanted to go full force, to just release that and go, here, I'm back.
If you're a player at his level, to have the rug pulled out from under you, no, you can't do that thing. I could tell he was trying to push through it. He was trying to stay positive, I'm gonna get through this, it's gonna be okay. But I think doctors would have been honest with him and would have been honest with his mom and his sister and his nephew. They would have told him everything. I think they all just kept it from the rest of us.
He was still in good spirits about getting the album done, and we were just talking about me coming down there, spending time and, learning the material and, helping it grow into the album. And then he told me, oh, wait, hold off for a little bit. I'm kind of going downhill. Let me get a hold of this and get my strength back before you come out.
But we were having more and more trouble, like doing a pass in an hour. It was taking a pass in 3 hours. I could tell this isn't right. He was gonna try to finish, even if the sounds weren't up to snuff, he was gonna try to finish them at his house. I went over to his house. He bought the mics that I recommended to mic his cabinets. Here's where the mics go. It'll be close to the sound we get at Morrisound. He said, this is gonna work.
When Chuck started driving around again, started spending more time alone, and writing the next Controlled Night album, he had a really humble ranch home, 5.5 acres. It was a super private home studio, and we all felt safe that he could be out there by himself again.
It wasn't uncommon for us not to hear from him when he was in studio. But at least after 6 or 8 hours, he would call, and he hadn't called. And that studio and that house was almost an hour away.
And we drive up there.
And we opened it up and found him on the floor. He couldn't get up. And he said, it's back.
This was right around the same time he was telling me, hey, if I don't make it, I need you to stand up for me at my funeral. And I'm like, holy crap, that's really heavy. That was kind of the smack in the face with the 2x4. We might not finish the record.
The challenge was, after a while, speech started to then deteriorate as well, and it became difficult. It had hurt him to be losing his ability to speak properly. He said, I can hardly say, I love you, Mom, or I love you, Dad. It's getting more difficult. And at one point, couldn't speak anymore. So I tried using like a board with letters on it, with different letters on different lines and pointing to them, and it helped a little bit, but it was very frustrating because it was very slow. And it was a very difficult time for him and for us too, of course.
I called Dr. Weiner in New York, and I said, Chuck's getting weaker. He said, can you get his latest scan sent to me? I said, yeah, I had a scan yesterday. And he called me, and he said, I'm surprised Chuck's communicating at all. He said, Chuck may have less than a day to live. I said, what? And he said, less than a day. Well, Chuck was in the hospital. I went up to Chuck's room, and I pulled Mom out in the hall, and I said, Mom, I'm taking Chuck out of this hospital today. She said, oh, don't, he'll die. I said, he's dying. And we promised he would not die in a hospital. So I'm taking him out of the hospital today.
It was around Christmas time, so we made sure the living room was as cheerful as possible.
We went into the house. It was all lit up Christmas.
We had a Christmas tree up, decorations, we had the fireplace going.
And a tear fell from his eye.
I remember getting him in bed. Once that all settled down, it got really quiet and somber.
We made it by the skin of our teeth because 3 hours later he died.
I was in the house with him, and then I could see he did that last breath, and I knew that was it.
I was at work and got a phone call from Beth Ann, and they wanted me to come over. And I sat over there with his mom for a couple of hours, and And with Chuck, you know, I'm trying to decipher, you know, your best friend from childhood lying there, passed away.
Yeah, it was tough.
It was December 17th, 2001. At that time, I had signed a contract to go to the Army. The Army let us go home on holiday. And I got off the plane and I just saw my parents' face and I knew that he had passed away. And I had just missed him by a few days. And so I petitioned my NCO if I could stay a little bit extra and attend his funeral. Because we weren't married and because we weren't together, they would not approve it. And I will always regret not just sticking through with him and giving him the ultimatum of getting married. But I also wish that we had been. If only it was to be able to attend his funeral. But I could not do that. And I'll never have closure. Ever.
What do you miss the most about Chuck?
Well, to say everything is not an overstatement, but certainly being able to pick up the phone. If anything went wrong or anything went great, he's the first person I would talk to. Chuck was a very down-to-earth human being. Even through the music and everything else, he was just a down-to-earth human being.
I really genuinely believe, you know, artists are like muses in the sense that we're just obviously like vessels for information. And Chuck was a true embodiment in the sense that he was just trying to work through shit. He was just trying to get it out there and say something.
I think definitely there's been a lot of growing as a person and musically, which go hand in hand together.
Chuck was showing people that you can progress, right? That you don't have to, you know, stay in your little bubble. He was just showing people, yeah, you can change, and it's fine.
For someone like Chuck, do you think it was super challenging for him to come to terms with not being able to finish that Control Denied album?
Oh, hell yeah. Because he was pretty excited to show everyone like, hey, look what I went through, and I'm still able to create this. Yeah, so in his mind, that album was very important to him.
There's a path to finishing the record. It's difficult. It's sort of, we'd have to do it forensically. It's kind of one of my goals in my career to get that record done for Chuck.
He was so young. He had so much more to say. That's the thing. But as much of it seems like a tragedy, it's like celebrate the body of work that he left behind. He did a lot.
Do you feel what I feel? See what I see?
I wish he could see now how huge he has become and how huge death has become, you know. I'm sure he'd be very proud of it.
To the level of what it is now. For a band that hasn't existed since 1998, I'd probably see that logo more than any other band. Patches, tattoos, stickers, everything. But to see that people that weren't even around at all when Death was a band, now they're growing up and it's their favorite band.
For me, music is the main reason why I'm here. You know, I'm here to play music, and hopefully people will enjoy it. You know, that's all that really matters to me.